Really matters.
Hello, my name is Donna Rosenblum, and I am your host today of Legacy Chronicles, Honoring the Past and Shaping the Future. And my guest today is Janet Lust Ganes, who is an artist, an art teacher, and she's here to talk about all of the things that go into being a second-generation Holocaust legacy and art, and how that all combines together. So, Janet, let's kind of go back to your becoming art and becoming an art teacher. Why is that the medium that you have gravitated to?
Okay. Well, I always wanted to be an artist ever since I was very young. And I was drawing, painting, and so on from a very early age. My mother also was an artist and encouraged me to pursue that. So storytelling through art is something that I've always enjoyed doing. I studied art in college, and shortly after, I decided I wanted to become an art teacher so I could kind of spread my love and enthusiasm for art to working with kids and helping them create their narratives or stories they want to tell.
And how long have you been doing that?
So I've been teaching for 29 years at Lawrence High School, and before that, I actually started teaching at Nassau County Museum of Art for a couple of years before that.
Okay. So let's now talk a little bit about your being a second generation, what that means, and then we'll bridge the gap between second generation, your mother, and art. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so becoming aware of my identity as a survivor, second generation survivor, started out very young. My mother and father both were survivors, and they spoke about their experiences. And I would say as I got older, through my teen years, I became aware of anti-Semitism more so, I had the unfortunate experience one time of meeting a Holocaust denier in my teen years. And that was a pivotal experience, kind of a wake-up call. And I was trained to do figurative art. I worked with a model many years doing figurative works. And when I would say the first piece evolved when I was probably in my late 30s, my mother was always speaking about her experiences resisting the Nazis. That was part of the fabric of growing up, hearing about how you have to speak your mind, not be afraid if somebody's bullying you or anything anti-Semitic, be proud of being Jewish. So that was always in my head, but I felt this urge to really tell her story in her handwriting in my late 30s. So I asked her, I loved her handwriting. It was this very classic German curly handwriting. And she grew up in Berlin. And I asked her if she could write one of her stories of resistance for me so that I could reproduce it in the form of an etching and then illustrate it. And by etching her words into the metal plates, and it's a rigorous process to produce etchings, I used solar plate etching, which actually photographed her work and got it in there in a very authentic way. And then I used traditional etching to portray the illustrations using aqua tint and all kinds of shading and line work.
And how did that feel for you? It must have been extremely therapeutic.
It was.
It must have been almost like a full circle, and just so many emotions must have come from that.
Definitely. Well, she loved writing it, and she rewrote it and refined it so many times. And then when I printed it, that was a catharsis, I think, just printing it, knowing that it would be there in her handwriting for me, for my family, for my children and their children someday to read it in her handwriting was very meaningful. So the illustrations were a rigorous process. I had to really pare it down to kind of 3 stages in the first etching: a before, a middle, and an after. A triptych, which is a 3-panel story. And then I continued on to do another one. The first one is really about her standing up to the Nazis when she was back in Poland after the 1939, when Jews were allowed, who were Polish citizens, were allowed to leave Germany because Hitler was making Germany Judenrein, so they free of Jews. So they went back to Poland, and there was a story about an episode where the Nazis came into her apartment to search for a shortwave radio, and then after they found the radio, they wanted to do a strip search of her and my grandmother, and she flat out refused and defied them, addressing them in perfect German, and they backed off. So she reached them in some way. Their humanity was still there to just withdraw, and that was a very powerful experience. It stayed with her and helped shape who she was, I think, from the age of 14. Then I did another etching about another story of resistance when she was called a dirty Jew earlier on in her life, when she was almost 8 years old, and she punched out a Nazi boy who confronted her repeatedly, calling her a dirty Jew. And when she had had enough, she just let him have it.
So, great. Thank you so much for sharing those. So when did you decide that you wanted to show this to the world? I mean, it's one thing to do this with your mom, to have her write, for you to, create these things yourself. But when did you decide that this is something that needs to be much bigger than the two of you?
Okay, good question. So I was really doing it for myself and for her and for, like I said, for my family. But showing art and doing art, two very different things. As artists, we do things personally because we're kind of drawn to do them in a way that you just have a calling for it. You have to say something. So I felt that, but I didn't really know where I could show this in the form of a public museum. It wasn't like artists were being featured who were creating these narratives about the Holocaust, especially when I made the first one, which was around 2001. So I was fortunate to meet Irving Roth, who is was the founder of the Holocaust Resource Center and started a program called Adopt or Survivor, also around the same time. So the timing was really lining up. 2001, I was making these etchings, and I had this fortunate phone call from him. He was looking for our teachers to participate in a local program. He was actually looking for my husband, who was teaching nearby, to execute the program through his students in his school. And I said, "This sounds great. Let me participate." So my first time I showed this work was actually at the gallery at the Holocaust Resource Center. Later on, I showed it a couple of times, like locally at the Art League of Long Island. One time a piece was in the Heckscher Museum of Art as part of their, local shows. But the work has not really been shown anywhere other than on Long Island.
Do you want to show some of the images of that?
Sure.
And talk about one or two of them?
The first image that was part of the etching series called Tales of Resistance was the one I described with her handwriting. And the view in this piece is looking like through kind of a vignette of a keyhole. The first image is where the Nazis were approaching through the door, and then kind of you can view in and see my mother resisting with her hands folded, acting very defiant. And then the third scene is when the Nazis leave, and they're just kind of thinking for a moment how the world stood still, how they were spared. So another work that was also done in the triptych format came later on, probably about 4 years later, when I was participating in Adopt or Survivor. And that tells the story about Ethel Bower Catz, who is a survivor who was the first person to really tell me her story who wasn't a family member. And that really made a big impression on me because, first of all, I connected with her because she had the same Eastern European accent as my grandmother, and she sounded like her, and my grandmother had passed away several years before. So I wanted to know more about Ethel's story, and Irving Roth
And you just happened to be at the center when she was there.
Well, I was at the center when she was there one time, bringing my work to exhibit, but also she was one of the survivors who participated when my students did Adopt a Survivor as well. So I had a student do work about her, and then I did work several years later about her, and I met with her several times and got to really know her and hear her story, and it was a great experience for me.
Would you share with us the three panel piece that you
sure.
and why you chose that part of her story? Because her story is so incredible. There's so many things to discuss in her story, but those 3 panels are very, very powerful. So
yes. So the first panel is basically when she had been hiding in her family's farmhouse, and they were attacked by the local Ukrainian militia of the time, and her father pushed her out the window and told her to run. And she was just wearing a nightgown. She was almost, I think, 17 years old, and she and her brothers and her sister also ran out of the farmhouse, and she was beaten and left for dead. The rest of her family, sadly, was murdered. It was a horrible scene, and she was knocked out and left for dead, and she awoke. So the first panel is when she's just left for dead. The second panel is when she had this incredible feeling that she was alive and that she could run and hopefully, survive, run to her safety, the will to live. So she just kept running, and then she collapsed again, and she saw 3 figures coming towards her. That's the last panel. The 3 figures coming towards her who she didn't know if they were her rescuers or her killers.
And you entitle that "Driven by Raw Fear,
I Ran." Yeah, that was one of her phrases that really stuck with me and seemed to encapsulate her story because she was driven, to run, but also to survive.
Right. So let's talk about the transition and how you impart this to your students. So you did a piece on Ethel, and then one of your students also did a piece on Ethel. How do you get your kids to grasp this, to see things in this same kind of lens? So let's talk about that, and then maybe what the ultimate goal of that work is.
Okay. Well, the student who created the work based on Ethel was part of the Adopt a Survivor program dating back almost 20 years or so ago. That was a very intense program. Students sat and met with the survivors, and it was a very one-on-one process in small groups. That opportunity to actually become a witness to their survival by listening to a witness is something that I think really speaks to the power of art. And if you have the art skills to be able to tell that story, it's in the person's head for their life. So using the narratives of the Holocaust as a way to inspire students to tell stories and to learn the history of that individual seemed incredibly meaningful. To me as a teacher, it was for me as an artist, of course, and they had seen that I had done it with my own mother's story. Right. So I think the students realizing, hey, this is important to my teacher. I'm going to take this seriously. I'm gonna see what is this all about, And I did encourage them to meet with them and refine the work and do the sketches and all of the hard work that it takes to actually be able to tell a story. So that was 20 or so years ago. But throughout my teaching at Lawrence High School, I was fortunate to be able to take trips to Holocaust centers. We had gone to the Holocaust Resource Center. Some students had documented Irving Roth's story. And more recently, we had come here to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. We had listened to the testimony from Ruth Mermelstein, another time from Bernie Fershpan as a 2G survivor speaking about his dad's story, which was very powerful. He also came to my school. But this year, I was really reflective. I was just thinking, there are fewer survivors. I want to do this intense experience again. How can I do this? So I turned to one of my friends who connected me with Rosalie Simon. And that was a special experience. We got to meet her, and 3 students created works based on her, and they were just struck by her story. And they came through with flying colors. They really, really took it on and created unique works that are on view here in this exhibit.
Yes, and I have to say that when we did the opening of the exhibit in early March, and Rosalie was here, and your student was here, and your student was explaining to Rosalie about her own piece, and Rosalie, it was wonderful to be a fly on the wall, just watching the interaction between Rosalie and your student. It was a very special experience. So not only for the survivor and the student, but for others to be a part of that and understand the power and the impact and the insight and all of the things that go with it is just amazing. So let me ask you, how do you decide, or how do the students decide what piece of the story that they're going to focus on? So I know for myself, I also did Adopt a Survivor, Irving's Adopt a Survivor program with my students, where I taught, and they would hear the story, and then I would ask them, all right, well, what about the story really jumped out at you? What are the 3 things of the story? And then they tended to focus on those to do. So when Irving couldn't play soccer, that was, when Irving was deported, when, there were certain things that they, resonated with them. And that's what they either wrote poetry about or they did art pieces on. How do you, is there ever a time where a student wants to do something and you're like, I'm not sure if that really is going to work, or, right. or they try something and it doesn't work? Like, how does that, it's a process.
Well, each student really took on different aspects of her story. One of them, they all knew actually what they were going to do. So these were pretty self-motivated students, I have to say. You can't really do this Adopt a Survivor program with just any student. And I invited them to participate because I was hoping that they could really rise to the occasion, and they did not disappoint.
Right.
So one girl, when she heard that the aspect of the story where there was a guard who was saving Rosalie, she was a red-headed guard, and she made a lot of focus on the fact that she had red hair. So the student actually is a redhead, and she really kind of bonded with that idea of who the savior was and identifying with that. So she said, I want to do the moment when the redheaded woman is giving her the uniform. So great. So we talked about, she did sketches. We reviewed them back and forth, the perspective, what would be the most powerful viewpoint, and so on. The other student did something about an incident that happened to her in the ghetto. She was very struck by it. I think it's the emotionalism that hits the student that can drive the part of the narrative that they want to illustrate. It didn't really have to give them too many ideas. That they were pretty clear on it. And the third student did 3 different aspects of the story. So it was interesting that way, that she did almost like a montage. So I encouraged them, but it really came from them, and through the process of sketching and in-progress critiques, I kind of coached them to create the work. And they each chose different media as well.
Maybe talk a little bit about last year, your school was doing the Diary of Anne Frank, and you decided that this might be a really great time to bring out some of this art and go back to the connection between art and the Holocaust, and doing this type of exhibit in your own school, especially after October 7th, especially
Right.
after the rise of anti-Semitism that we've seen here. I think it just took on a life of its own.
Yes, it did. I was fortunate that we have a gallery in my school and that the director of the play, who had already decided to do the Diary of Anne Frank prior to the events of October 7th, that was already in the works. But she said to me, can you please come up with something to put in the gallery? I thought of all the works that we had in previous years done, some that were on view, others that were in storage, and we pulled them out, and it was like, let's just see what this work looks like today.
Right.
So some of them we had to dust off, and then the work held up over the years, and it just, when you have art on the wall and a viewer goes through and kind of has to thread the story together and put their own knowledge of history together with the symbols, the icons. Sadly, they're seeing a lot on social media today where swastikas, yellow stars with Yuda are being used, and in a very hateful way to kind of portray aspects of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. So explaining to students that it's okay to have this work in art, because art can instruct. There's a sharp difference between hate speech and art that is instructive. Right. So it's important for them to know that, to identify it, and to call it out when they see it on social media.
Sure. Was it more, maybe talking about modern day, what's happening today, does showing the Holocaust through art, it's always been extremely powerful, but does it have a different weight now? Do you feel differently today than you did maybe 2 years ago or 5 years ago?
Well, I'm proud of the work that the students created and that I created. I think it speaks volumes to show it today in the context of the day that we are in, our time. We have to learn from history. We have to continue to show the work and to tell the stories of the individuals who survived it. I mean, each story is unique. You can really learn the Holocaust accurately, one story at a time. And when people are fortunate to hear it directly from, firsthand from the mouth of a survivor or from the second generation, it is a very powerful impact on that person. So showing the work is extremely important, doing the work and continuing to visit museums and educating people and having them really learn through the art if they take the time to do so, to do the deep looking, and to be visually literate is a really powerful way to learn about the Holocaust and to understand the history.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's so beautiful always about art, and particularly your students' work, is, like you say in the piece on Ethel, you want students to look at these pieces. You want them to have questions. You want them to want to know more.
Yeah,
and that they're going to go out and they're now going to do some research. They're going to try to get the answers. They're going to talk to other people. That it's all part of the learning process. That learning never ends. And that Ethel story will never be told just in a 3-panel piece. It's just the beginning.
Absolutely.
And I think that is so beautiful, and that's why we love to have these types of exhibits here, is because we want people to see things in a different perspective or in a different way, or to say, I want to know more.
Another piece that I just wanted to address is called Footsteps Ahead.
Yes.
And this is the piece that I chose for the postcard of the exhibit, which is called Lest We Forget, Stories of Hope, Resistance, and Survival Retold Through Art. This piece utilizes artifacts from my own family's personal history and kind of pieces together passport artifacts with different parts of the story of escape. And like I said, each story is unique, and bringing in the historical artifacts whenever possible. There's another piece that has an image of Hitler's stamp that he issued in 1938 on his birthday that was incorporated into one of my etchings because, again, to show the artifacts, what was going on at the time is part of the storytelling.
Right.
So,
yeah, no, it's great. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Janet. I am so happy that you came to be part of this podcast today. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And please share, subscribe, and stay connected to HMTC, HMTV. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.